for a ceremony, but for making it his home. And so it's really fitting to be having the ceremony here. Thank you for that. Ron was a wartime baby. They were tough times for working class families, and arriving 6 weeks prematurely made things even more difficult. Ron had to be left at the hospital because he was too small to be taken home. So Mum would express milk for him, and Dad would deliver it to the hospital by bike. His condition didn't improve though, and the hospital agreed to send him home as a last resort. His mother's nurturing made all the difference, and he immediately began to thrive. This was the start of a special bond that was evident right up until Mum died in 2002. Our family's a classic nuclear family where we all appear to be happy, but the undercurrent of unhappiness between Mum and Dad was actually manifested as direct hostility between Dad and Ron. That's my take on it anyway. Dad called him the black sheep of the family, or snake in the grass. And Ron was often getting into trouble or being argumentative with Dad. This antagonism continued in various forms until Dad's death in 1990. The last visual image Ron had of Dad was of Dad lurking in the shadows at the railway station as Ron left to go back to Brisbane after another one of their arguments. Dad had presumably come to the station to try to put the situation right, but just couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't break the patterning of how they related to each other. The image haunted Ron, though, and he became determined to get to understand what the hostility was about. His breakthrough came when he was able to contact Dad's spirit, and they were able to resolve their differences and appreciate the love they had for each other. It's a great example of how Ron was out there in his spiritual development, but also how he could create a triumph out of adversity. In this case, after some 50 years of conflict with his father, he became assured that his dad loved him. Ron was 6 years older than me, and he was my hero. He was good at sports, he was successful in his studies, and he had lots of friends. We became great mates, even with this age difference. We'd go cruising in his FX Holden and play our own version of I Spy, competing to spot the chicks we knew. He was also very generous with picking up my friends and I after youth club or dances, but I had to accept that he'd drop me and my mates off first and then take the girls home. It seems surprising looking back that Ron stayed at home in what for him was a very repressive family environment until the age of 23, when he moved into a student dig in Carlton, and the change was remarkable. He learned to look after himself, where previously he couldn't even pick up his undies without being told to do it. He became an organised businessman and became involved in politics and agitated for social justice. It was like his life just took off once he left home. It was fabulous. In the late 60s, Ron met Mary, and they married and moved to Adelaide, where Ron was posted for work. This was when Ron's spiritual quest started, and this eventually led to him becoming a devotee of Guru Maharaji. I called Mary to tell her of Ron's passing, and she emailed a reflection of their time together. And I'll ask Christine to read that out.
So what can I say about him? He was always the life of the party, not in a gross, ostentatious way, but he'd always try to make sure that everybody was having a good time. He'd look for shy people on the fringes and have them laughing and relaxed in no time. Everybody loved him because there was no malice there. He just tried to connect with everyone individually. He started searching for more meaning in life very early on. Ainsley Mears' Relief Without Drugs had the first real influence in this direction. No more injections at the dentist. Then Paul Bragg visited Australia, and I was dragged along to hear this fanatical 80-year-old speak. Health, strength, youth, vitality became our motto. No more meat pies. Running every morning, deep brain breathing, we kept it up for years. When we moved to Adelaide, we visited the Theosophical Society a few times before becoming attracted to Divine Light Mission. I would have been quite content to go there 1 or 2 nights a week, but Ron, in his typical all-or-nothing way, insisted we go to satsang every night. I couldn't argue, as we did feel good when we went. And eventually, we learned to meditate. But it really did make a mockery of our new country lifestyle. We were sharing a farm with Rob and Wendy Morris and their 2 children, and yet our whole life seemed to be a race, going in and out of satsang and jobs, coming back to the farm to sleep. This eventually led to our move to a group of houses in Beulah Road, Norwood, where we shared with other premies, devotees of Maharaji. Still, this wasn't enough. He felt that to be a true devotee, one should follow the single, celibate, ashramic lifestyle. So when he was asked to move to Brisbane Ashram, he was elated. He couldn't understand my tears at the airport, and I knew he had to go. There was no point in trying to hold him back, because he felt so strongly that this was to be his path. So, apart from a few letters, phone conversations, and a couple of meetings here and there, this was when Ron walked out of my life. One of the most precious things that he gave me was the bond with his family, in particular with his sister Yvonne. We used to meet when I went to Melbourne, and she'd fill me in on his latest exploits and keep me in touch with everyone else. Ron touched a lot of people in his life, most of whom I'll never be able to contact to tell of his passing. But I think all of them will have warm memories of him, of a kind word, a lasting friendship, or a long relationship. And I think, whatever happened later in his life, that his warmth and friendship helped to change many lives, and that sparkle in his eye will remain with us all.
Ron told me recently that he could see the patterning that caused him to push Mary away. It wasn't about Maharaji, it was about him. Looking back, he regretted that he had treated such a wonderful partner in this way, but he also knew that he had done the work since to address this type of behaviour. And just to explain that, after Maharaji, no, there was never after Maharaji. Maharaji was there all the way through, and we'll have, I can't remember his name, speaking about that. But he had other modalities, and he became his very own person with his spiritual quest. And he just had amazing techniques, and it was, for him, it was about development. It was about moving on with his life and becoming a more spiritual person. So when I talk about doing the work, it's that sort of work. During this intense devotee phase, there were several years where I didn't actually meet up with Ron and had little meaningful communication with him. I became resigned to the situation and actually mourned the loss of my brother and mate. But Ron burst back into the family scene in 1988 with his new partner Leslie and her daughter Alita. And we quickly found we had the Spider of old. Spider was the family nickname, which dated back to the 60s beatnik era, when he'd wear the same black skivvy and black jeans every day. Their visits to Melbourne were characterised by his outrageous behaviour. He'd terrorise the young nephews and nieces, wind up the older ones, be over the top with us adults, chase skirt if it presented. Always the life of the party. Then Dad did what's now become the family heart attack trick in 1990, which left Mum stranded because she was sure she'd go first. Spide provided enormous support for Mum in accepting the challenge of living independently. He inspired her to reinvent herself, and even though she was in her 70s, she became a ball of energy again. When our older sister Yvonne had major illnesses in the late 1990s, Spide and his second wife Annie, where are you Annie, became closely involved with her, coming to Melbourne frequently and contacting her on a daily basis. It was a rekindling of the close relationship Spide and Yvonne had in their early years. Spide and Annie were with Yvonne when she departed this world. In the past year or so, our family, my wife, Bronwyn, got lost in that one. My wife, our kids, our sister, the other nephews and nieces and their kids, so the extended family, we've experienced a remarkable change with Spider. He recognised that his over-the-top behaviour was dominating and at times offensive, even assaulting. It was a difficult issue to face up to, but he could see that he'd been in denial about its impacts. So he did the work to find out what was causing the behaviour and was able to weed it out of his life. It didn't diminish his spiritedness though, but allowed us to get close to him in a way that wasn't possible previously. It allowed us to clearly see the love and caring that he had for us. And there's been no ambivalence about our love for him. Towards the end, Ron was like a modern day monk. He was living with few possessions in his noddy van. This is the same man who'd been very successful in the business world, who'd built up considerable wealth through property development and then enjoyed frequent international travel and a comfortable lifestyle. But he wasn't a broken man, far from it. Once again, he triumphed over adversity. He spent hours each day involved in his spiritual practices that generated healing for society and the planet. He was grateful for being surrounded by loving people, living simply in close connection with the land. He had fun with them. He was delighted to be strongly connected to his family. He loved the mountain and he loved the mountain people. I haven't any doubt that he'd done what he needed to do in this world, and it was time for the next adventure. I'm thankful that he's shown us the way, but I'll miss him enormously.